Poor young girl. Married a 73-year-old millionaire. A week later, she found out why he chose her. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. Rain poured over the small town of Austin, Texas, turning the sidewalks into mirrors of neon light. Under a flickering street lamp, Clara Evans, 22 years old and carrying a folder full of unpaid bills, hurried through the cold evening wind. Her worn shoes soaked through with water, her breath visible in the damp air. She had just left the hospital after learning that her mother's heart surgery would cost more than she could ever afford. As she walked, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Miss Evans," a calm, low voice said, "this is Mr. Theodore Whitmore. I would like to meet you regarding your financial situation. Please come to Whitmore Estate tomorrow at 10. Clara froze. She knew that name, Theodore Whitmore, the 73-year-old millionaire known for his cold demeanor and vast real estate empire. She had once worked as a waitress at one of his charity events, though she doubted he remembered her. The next morning, she stood at the gates of his mansion. Iron fences taller than her framed a garden trimmed like a museum display. A butler led her inside, past marble floors and golden chandeliers, until she saw him. Silver hair, posture straight, suit impeccable, eyes sharp as glass. "Thank you for coming," he said, not rising from his chair. "Please, sit." Clara did, clutching her worn purse tightly. "Sir, you said this is about my debts?" He nodded once. "I know about your situation. Your mother's medical bills, your late father's loans. You are drowning, Miss Evans, and I can help you." Clara frowned, confused. "Why would you do that?" He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a contract. At the top, in clean serif font, were the words, "Marriage Agreement." She stared at it, speechless. "I am offering you stability," he said evenly. "A legal marriage. You will be provided housing, financial support, and medical coverage for your family. In return, you will accompany me to public events for 1 year. There will be no intimacy, no emotional obligations. At the end of the term, you will be free." Clara blinked, her throat dry. "You are asking me to marry you?" "Yes," Theodore said. "This is not about affection. It is about order. My board is demanding I settle my estate before I am gone. I need someone I can trust, someone without an agenda." She stared at him, her heart pounding. "But why me? You do not even know me." "Oh." His eyes softened slightly. "Because you looked me in the eye that night at the charity dinner and said, 'Money does not make a man kind.' You were the only person who ever dared say that to me." The silence stretched. Rain tapped gently on the tall windows. She thought of her mother lying in the hospital bed, pale and waiting. Finally, she whispered, "What are the conditions?" He leaned back. "You will live here, attend 5 public events, and respect my privacy. You may not discuss this arrangement with anyone. You will sign the contract tonight if you agree." Clara hesitated, her pulse racing. Her instincts screamed that this was insane. Yet behind his composed tone, she sensed something deeper, a loneliness he was too proud to admit. When he handed her a fountain pen, her fingers trembled. She looked at his wrinkled hand resting beside the paper, the glint of a wedding ring long faded with time. "Why do I feel like I am signing away more than a name?" she murmured. He met her gaze. "Because you are, and so am I." With one slow breath, Clara signed. Outside, thunder rolled across the Texas sky. Inside, 2 strangers sealed a contract that neither of them yet understood would change both their lives forever. The morning after signing the contract, Clara woke to sunlight streaming through tall white curtains. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memory of last night hit Mr. Theodore Whitmore, the contract, her trembling hand signing his name beside hers. She sat up in the vast guest room, staring at the marble fireplace and the neatly folded clothes left on a chair. A note rested on top in elegant handwriting. "Breakfast at 8. The driver will take you to the hospital afterward. T.W." Her throat tightened. He had already arranged her mother's surgery. The thought should have brought relief, but instead it filled her with unease. What kind of man could buy peace of mind so easily? Downstairs, the dining hall was larger than her entire apartment. Theodore sat at the far end of a long mahogany table, reading the newspaper. A cup of black coffee steamed beside him. He looked up as she approached, calm, unreadable. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," he said. The title made her freeze. That sounds strange. It will sound less strange the more you hear it," he replied evenly. He gestured for her to sit. She obeyed, awkward in her thrift store dress among gold-trimmed china. A maid poured her orange juice without a word. The silence stretched until Theodore folded his paper. "There are a few matters we need to clarify," he began. "I have informed my attorney and my estate manager. They will handle all formalities. You will have your own wing in this house. Privacy will be respected." Clara nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "And the events you mentioned?" "5. The first is this Friday, a charity gala. My late wife's foundation. You will attend as my spouse." Her stomach twisted. "I do not know how to act in that kind of place." He met her eyes. "Then we will have you trained, a stylist, a speech coach, and etiquette lessons. You will do fine." Clara hesitated. "Why does it matter so much what they think?" He leaned back. "Because perception builds power, Mrs. Whitmore. Appearances keep wolves at bay." She looked at him then, really looked. The sharp jaw, the weary eyes. Behind his calm tone was something fragile, a man who had spent a lifetime defending walls too high to climb. Later that afternoon, the driver took her to the hospital. Her mother's eyes filled with tears when Clara told her the surgery was paid in full. "How did you manage this, sweetheart?" Clara forced a smile. "I just got lucky, Mom." She could not bring herself to say the words, "I got married." That night, back at the estate, she wandered through the echoing halls. Every room smelled faintly of old books and polished oak. Portraits lined the corridor Theodore's ancestors, serious and proud. At the end hung a single photo of a younger Theodore beside a woman with bright eyes and a laugh frozen in time, his late wife. Clara stopped in front of it, whispering to herself, "I am not replacing you. I am just borrowing your name." From down the hallway, his voice startled her. "You do not need to whisper, Mrs. Whitmore." He stood a few steps away, dressed in a dark cardigan instead of his usual suit. "She would have liked you," he said quietly. "She admired honesty." Clara turned to him. "Then she must have loved you very much." A shadow crossed his face. "She did, and I failed her." He left before she could answer. The echo of his footsteps faded into the silence, leaving Clara alone beneath the portrait, torn between gratitude and guilt. Outside, the Texas sky burned orange as the sun sank behind the trees. Inside the mansion, two lives bound by paper and circumstance took their first uncertain steps toward something neither dared to name. 3 days later, the mansion buzzed with quiet preparation. Tailors carried garment bags upstairs, and the scent of polished silver filled the hall. Clara sat stiffly in front of a vanity mirror while a stylist pinned her hair. "Tilt your chin up a little, Mrs. Whitmore," the woman said softly. The title still made Clara flinch. She looked at her reflection, a pale young woman wrapped in an elegant navy dress that hugged her waist too perfectly. The makeup artist dusted her cheeks, hiding the sleepless nights under her eyes. In the mirror's reflection stood Theodore, observing from a distance with his hands behind his back. "You look suitable," he said finally. Clara managed a small, polite smile. "I suppose that is the goal, right?" "To look the part." He nodded once. "That is all society ever demands. Appearance." The car ride to the charity gala was silent except for the hum of the engine. Clara stared out the window at the glow of the city, her heart pounding. The gown felt heavy, and her hands twisted nervously in her lap. Theodore sat beside her, every inch composed. "You do not need to speak much tonight," he said quietly. "Just smile, nod, and let me lead." Clara nodded, though her stomach churned. When they arrived, cameras flashed outside the Grand Hotel entrance. Reporters called out his name. Theodore exited first, straight-backed, the image of old wealth. Then he turned, offering his hand to her. For a heartbeat, Clara froze, but his steady gaze anchored her. She stepped out, her fingers brushing his. The crowd murmured. Inside, chandeliers shimmered above a sea of expensive gowns and polished shoes. Waiters glided past with champagne glasses. Theodore introduced her to donors, board members, and politicians. Each handshake felt like a test. Some smiled warmly, others with polite suspicion. During dinner, she tried to keep pace with the formal chatter, when a journalist leaned across the table and asked, "Mrs. Whitmore, what drew you to your husband?" She nearly choked on her drink. Theodore turned slightly, waiting. The table fell silent. Clara's pulse raced. Then, with a small smile, she said, "Respect. It may not be fashionable, but it lasts longer than attraction." A ripple of surprise moved around the table. Theodore's brow lifted, just slightly, before he looked away, hiding what might have been a trace of pride. After dinner, a violinist began to play, and couples drifted onto the dance floor. Clara stood near the edge, watching the graceful movements, wishing she could disappear into the walls. Theodore approached, his cane tapping lightly against the marble floor. "They will expect us to dance," he said. "I do not know how," she confessed. "Then follow my lead." His hand, firm but gentle, guided hers. As they moved, she realized he was careful not to draw her too close, respecting the invisible boundary between them. The crowd watched, whispering, yet in that moment she forgot them all. His touch was steady, precise, almost protective. When the music ended, applause rippled through the hall. Theodore released her hand and leaned slightly closer. "You handled yourself well tonight," he murmured. "Better than I expected." Clara smiled faintly. "That almost sounds like a compliment." "It is," he replied. "Do not let it go to your head." Later that night, as they returned to the mansion, Clara slipped off her heels in the foyer, sighing with relief. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" she asked quietly. He looked at her for a long moment. "Pretending is the only thing that keeps certain people alive." "I do not believe that," she said. "Sometimes honesty heals more than it hurts." He smiled, but there was sadness in it. "You are young. You still believe that truth and kindness win." Before she could respond, his butler entered with a silver envelope. "A message from Mr. Whitmore's attorney," he said. Theodore opened it, his expression tightening. "My nephew is challenging the estate again," he muttered. "He believes this marriage is a manipulation." Clara frowned. "I am sorry. Do not be. It is the nature of vultures to circle when they smell opportunity." He folded the letter. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be long." That night, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows, the same rhythm as the night she signed her name. She wondered what she had really agreed to, an arrangement to save her family, or a role in a much larger war she did not understand. A few doors down, Theodore sat in his study, staring at the old photograph of his late wife. He whispered under his breath, "You told me once to find someone honest. Maybe this time." I listened. He closed the picture frame and exhaled slowly. The house was quiet, but for the first time in years, he did not feel entirely alone. Meanwhile, in her room, Clara touched the ring on her finger, simple, gold, and far too large. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but deep down she felt something changing. What had started as a contract was slowly becoming a story neither of them had planned to write. The week after the gala, the mansion settled into a quiet rhythm. Mornings began with the scent of brewed coffee and the rustle of newspapers. Evenings ended with silence stretching across long hallways. Clara had grown used to the staff's polite nods and Theodore's precise schedule. Yet every day, something subtle shifted between them, small exchanges that felt almost human. One morning, she found him in the library, standing before shelves stacked to the ceiling. "Do you actually read all of these?" she asked, running her fingers along the spines. "I used to," he said without looking up. "Now I mostly pretend. It keeps people from realizing how lonely books can be." Clara smiled. "Books are only lonely if you stop turning their pages." He glanced at her, surprised, then closed the volume in his hands. "You have a way of saying things that make sense long after they are spoken." That afternoon, his physician arrived for a routine checkup. Clara waited outside the study, but she could hear fragments of conversation through the half-closed door. "Your heart is stable, Mr. Whitmore, but you must avoid stress. Do not overwork yourself." "I am not working," Theodore replied flatly. "I am existing." There was a pause, then the doctor sighed. "Existence without purpose can kill faster than disease." When the door opened, Theodore seemed paler than usual. "I suppose you heard," he said. Clara shook her head. "Only that you are supposed to rest." He gave a small, tired smile. Resting has never saved anyone. Later that night, thunder rolled across the Texas sky. The storm knocked out the mansion's power, plunging the halls into darkness. Clara stepped out of her room, guided only by the faint glow of lightning through tall windows. She found him in the conservatory, sitting alone by the window, the outline of his face caught in the pale flash of light. "You should not be out of bed," she said softly. "I could say the same to you," he replied, his tone softer than usual. She hesitated, then crossed the room. The air smelled of rain and old roses. "Were you thinking about her?" she asked carefully. He looked at the photograph on the table, his late wife smiling under the summer Sunday. "Every day," he said quietly. "I married her young. She was the only person who saw me before the money did." Clara's voice was gentle. "And yet you chose to marry me, a stranger." "I chose honesty," he said, "even when it looks like desperation." A flash of lightning illuminated the room, and for a moment their eyes met. Clara could see the ache in his gaze, the loneliness of a man who had built an empire but lost the warmth that made life worth keeping. She reached for the blanket draped over the chair and handed it to him. "You do not have to keep pretending you are made of stone," she whispered. He accepted it, his hand brushing hers. The touch lingered longer than either of them intended. "You remind me that kindness still exists," he said. The storm began to fade, leaving only the sound of soft rain against glass. They sat in silence, two lives joined by a paper promise that was slowly becoming something real. When the lights flickered back on, Theodore stood and adjusted the blanket around his shoulders. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "I will take you to the Whitmore Foundation. It is time you see what my life truly is." Clara looked up at him, curiosity stirring in her chest. "Is that an invitation or another lesson in appearances?" He gave a rare, faint smile. "Maybe both." As he walked away, Clara watched him disappear down the hall, her heart steady but uncertain. Somewhere between gratitude and something she could not yet name, the walls between them had begun to crack. The following morning, the mansion's driver opened the black sedan door, and Clara stepped out into a world she had only seen in news reports. The Whitmore Foundation headquarters stood tall in downtown Austin. Glass walls, marble floors, and a brass plaque engraved with Theodore's name. Inside, assistants moved with quiet precision, greeting their employer with nervous respect. Theodore walked beside her, cane tapping lightly. "This place funds education and housing projects across Texas," he explained. "My wife founded it. I am merely maintaining her vision." Clara glanced around the busy lobby filled with photographs of smiling families and rebuilt schools. "It is more than maintenance," she said softly. "You are keeping her alive in every corner of this building." He paused at that, eyes unreadable. "Maybe," he murmured, "or maybe I am only delaying the inevitable." "Oh." They entered the boardroom, where a dozen executives sat waiting. The air shifted curiosity, skepticism, and something colder. Theodore gestured toward her. "This is Mrs. Clara Whitmore," he announced. "She will be representing me at future charity events." A man at the far end smirked. "How touching," he said. "But some of us are concerned, sir. This sudden marriage, it looks suspicious to investors." Clara's stomach twisted. She could feel every gaze on her. Theodore's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, she rose from her seat. "Mr. Whitmore does not owe anyone an explanation," she said, voice trembling at first, then steady. "He has given his life to this foundation. If you cannot respect that, perhaps you are sitting at the wrong table." Silence fell across the room. Theodore turned slowly toward her, the faintest flicker of surprise softening his stern features. Then, with calm authority, he said, "That will be all, gentlemen." The meeting ended without another word. Outside, he stopped beside her in the hallway. "You handled yourself well," he said quietly. "You did not have to defend me." "Yes, I did," she replied. "You have spent your life defending everyone else. Someone should return the favor." For the first time, his smile reached his eyes. "You are extraordinary, Mrs. Whitmore." That afternoon, he invited her to tour a newly opened children's shelter under the foundation's funding. The moment they arrived, a group of kids ran up, laughing and playing in the Texas sunlight. Clara knelt to help a little boy tie his shoelaces while Theodore watched from a distance, something like warmth flickering across his face. When she stood, he said quietly, "I had forgotten what this felt like. Real laughter. You built the reason for it," she said. "You just stopped noticing." On the drive home, the sky turned golden, the horizon stretching wide and calm. Clara leaned against the window, feeling an unfamiliar peace. For the first time since their marriage, she was not thinking about contracts or appearances. She was thinking about him, the man behind the suit, the heartbeat behind the reputation. Back at the mansion, Theodore lingered at the staircase. "You once asked me why I chose you," he said suddenly. Clara looked at him, startled. "Yes, you never answered." "I will," he said, "but not tonight." "Oh." He turned and disappeared into his study, leaving her alone with a quiet ache she could not explain. Upstairs, she removed her jewelry and stared at her reflection. The woman in the mirror no longer looked like a frightened girl surviving out of desperation. She looked like someone beginning to believe she mattered. Outside, the estate lights shimmered against the dark. In a house built on contracts and silence, a fragile bond had begun to take root, one not written in ink, but in something far more difficult to erase. The following evening, the house felt quieter than usual. The servants had gone home early, leaving the mansion wrapped in soft lamplight. Clara sat on the balcony outside her room, a shawl around her shoulders, watching the sunset melt into deep orange over the trees. For days, she had felt something changing inside her, a mix of gratitude, admiration, and something she did not want to name. Down below, the sound of Theodore's cane echoed against the marble floor. He stepped out into the courtyard, a folder tucked under his arm. When he noticed her on the balcony, he looked up. "You should come inside," he called. "It will get cold soon." She smiled faintly. "You always worry about everyone but yourself." He raised an eyebrow. "And yet you are the one sitting in the wind." A few minutes later, she joined him in the library. The air smelled of old paper and cedar wood. A small fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light over the bookshelves. Theodore poured 2 cups of tea and gestured for her to sit. "I wanted to show you something," he said, opening the folder. Inside were photographs, old black and white pictures of small towns, handwritten letters, and a faded certificate. "This was where I began," he explained. "My family lost everything when I was 10. My wife helped me build it all back. Every property I own, every investment, came from the ground up. But after she died, I stopped building for people. I started building for control." Clara studied the photos. "You rebuilt the world but forgot to live in it," she said softly. He smiled without humor. That sounds like something she would have said. He leaned back, his expression distant. "I am 73, Clara. People see the money, the mansion, but not the fear. The fear of being forgotten. The fear that everything I built will mean nothing when I am gone." She hesitated, then reached across the table, her hand resting gently over his. "You are not forgotten. You have changed lives, including mine. That means something." He looked down at their hands, then at her. "You do not owe me kindness." "It is not debt," she said. "It is choice." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of fire. His eyes softened, the sharp edges of his usual reserve melting away. "You remind me what loyalty looks like," he whispered. Later that night, Clara found herself wandering the dark hallway outside his study. She stopped when she heard faint music, an old jazz record playing softly. The door was half open. Inside, Theodore sat alone, his late wife's photo on the desk, but his gaze was fixed elsewhere. When he noticed her at the doorway, he did not send her away. "Do you ever think," she asked quietly, stepping inside, "that love can happen twice in a lifetime?" He exhaled slowly. "I used to think it could not. Now, I am not sure." The clock ticked between them, each second heavier than the last. Clara felt the air change, fragile but warm. For the first time, the distance between them did not feel impossible. She broke the silence with a nervous smile. "You said you would tell me why you chose me." He nodded. "I saw myself in you, the courage to face life even when it is unfair. My wife had that same fire. I thought I was helping you. I did not realize you would be the one helping me." Her chest tightened, but she held his gaze. "Then maybe this contract was never about saving anyone. Maybe it was about finding a reason to care again." He said nothing, only smiled faintly, a single tear catching the firelight. Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady. In that quiet library, the paper boundaries of their marriage finally began to blur, replaced by something that neither law nor money could define. The next morning began like any other. Sunlight spilled across the grand staircase, and the scent of breakfast filled the air. Yet something in the mansion's calm felt off too still, too deliberate. Clara noticed the servants whispering in corners, glancing toward the study with nervous eyes. When she entered the dining room, Theodore was already there, his expression unreadable, a letter folded neatly beside his plate. "Is everything all right?" she asked. He did not answer at first. Instead, he pushed the letter toward her. "You should read this," he said quietly. The letter bore the crest of his family's law firm. The words inside made her heart pound. "An inquiry into the validity of your marriage has been filed. Allegations of fraud and coercion have been submitted by Mr. Whitmore's nephew, Charles." Clara looked up, stunned. "He is accusing you, or me?" "Both of us," Theodore replied, his voice heavy. "He believes this marriage is a ploy to secure my estate." "That is absurd," she said. "You told him about the contract?" "I told no one. But money has a way of making truth sound like deception." Before she could respond, the butler entered, carrying a tablet. "Sir, you may want to see this." He turned the screen toward them. A headline blazed across the news feed. "Young wife or gold digger? Public questions Whitmore marriage." Dozens of photographs filled the screen. Clara at the gala, holding Theodore's arm, smiling nervously. The comments below were worse. "She is using him. She is after the inheritance." Poor old man. Clara's hands shook. "They are twisting everything," she whispered. Theodore's jaw tightened. "That is what they do. This is how the world punishes sincerity." Tears stung her eyes. "What will you do?" "I will handle it," he said firmly. "But you must stay out of the press. No statements, no interviews." She nodded, though her throat ached. "And what about you?" He met her gaze. "I have survived worse storms." But that evening, the house that once felt safe turned cold. Reporters gathered outside the gates, cameras flashing through the iron bars. Clara stood at her window, watching the chaos unfold. The phone rang non-stop with calls from journalists. When she answered one by mistake, a woman's voice said sharply, "How much did he pay you to play the grieving bride?" Clara slammed the phone down, her chest burning. She rushed to the study, desperate to speak to Theodore, but the door was locked. From inside, she heard muffled voices, Theodore's lawyer, and another man. "You must annul this marriage," the man insisted. "The board will not stand for it." When the door finally opened, Theodore looked exhausted. "Clara," he said softly, "go upstairs, please." She shook her head. "I will not hide while they tear you apart." "This is my fight," he said. "You have already given up enough." "But I am your wife," she said, her voice breaking. "Even if it started as paper, it became real to me." He turned away, pain flickering across his features. "That is exactly why you should leave before they destroy you, too." That night, Clara packed her small suitcase. She paused by the library, the fire still burning low, the chair where he had sat the night before now empty. She wanted to believe this was just another storm to pass, but deep down, she knew something had changed. When she stepped outside, rain began to fall, steady and cold. The iron gates creaked open, and for the first time since the day she arrived, she walked out alone. Behind her, the mansion loomed in silence, a monument to a love neither contract nor circumstance could fully protect. Days passed in quiet uncertainty. Clara rented a small apartment above a bakery downtown, far from the polished marble floors and constant whispers of the Whitmore estate. She found part-time work at a local bookstore, stacking novels and answering questions from curious customers who sometimes recognized her from the headlines. Most did not speak, but she could feel their judgment in the way they looked away too quickly. At night, she sat by the window with a cup of tea, staring at the city lights and wondering whether Theodore had eaten, whether his health had worsened, whether he missed her at all. She wanted to call, but pride and fear kept her silent. The man she had once known as distant and cold had become someone she could no longer stop thinking about. One evening, as she closed the store, a familiar car pulled up at the curb. The driver stepped out first, followed by Theodore himself. He looked thinner, paler, and the sight of him stole her breath. She rushed forward before she could think. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he said simply. "They wanted me to sign the annulment papers. I refused." Clara's heart thudded. "You should not be out. You are not well." He gave a small smile. "I have been unwell for a long time, Clara, but losing you made it worse." They sat on a bench outside the bookstore, the hum of passing traffic filling the silence. Theodore reached into his coat pocket and handed her a sealed envelope. "This was supposed to go to you after my death," he said, "but I would rather give it while I am still alive." Inside was a letter on official stationery, along with legal documents. The words blurred as she read, "Transfer of ownership. The Whitmore Foundation shall henceforth be co-directed by Mrs. Clara Whitmore." She looked up, stunned. "What is this?" "A correction," he said softly. "For too long I built everything in my name alone. You reminded me that legacy is meant to be shared." Tears welled in her eyes. "But this will only make them hate me more." He shook his head. "Let them. I am not protecting an image anymore. I am protecting truth." Suddenly, a group of photographers appeared at the corner, flashing cameras and shouting questions. Theodore flinched, clutching his chest. Clara stood quickly, shielding him. "That is enough," she shouted. "Can you not see he is ill?" One of the photographers lowered his camera, guilt flickering across his face. The others backed away. Clara turned to Theodore, alarmed. His breathing was shallow. "You need to sit down," she urged, guiding him back to the bench. "I am fine," he whispered, though his voice trembled. "I wanted to tell you, I never chose you for pity. I chose you because you reminded me what it means to care without condition." Her tears fell freely now. "You cannot say things like that and then collapse on me." He laughed weakly. "I will try to avoid collapsing." An ambulance was called, and as paramedics arrived, Theodore caught her hand. "Promise me something," he said, his eyes tired but calm. "No matter what happens, do not run away again. The foundation needs your heart more than it ever needed my money." She nodded, unable to speak. As they loaded him into the ambulance, she climbed in beside him, holding his hand tightly. The flashing lights painted the night red and blue, and through the chaos, Clara whispered, "You are not alone anymore. I am right here." For the first time since she had met him, Theodore closed his eyes, not in pain, but in peace. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. This was no longer a contract, it was a promise written in something far stronger than ink. 2 months later, the gardens of the Whitmore Foundation bloomed with spring. The air smelled of jasmine and sunlight, the sound of children's laughter drifting from the playground nearby. A new brass plaque had been installed at the entrance. It read, "The Whitmore Foundation for Hope, established in honor of Theodore and Clara Whitmore." Clara stood before it, her hand resting over the engraved letters. She had returned to the estate not as a wife under contract, but as the co-director of the foundation. Theodore's recovery had been slow but steady. Against every prediction, he was walking again, his cane tapping the marble floor with quiet rhythm. He joined her on the path, his gray suit crisp, his eyes brighter than they had been in months. "You did this," he said softly. She shook her head. "We did this." The media storm that once tried to destroy them had faded, replaced by stories of the charity expansion and the foundation's new housing program for low-income families. The same reporters who once called her a fraud now praised her determination. But Clara did not care for praise. What mattered was that the children in those houses had warm beds and full stomachs. As they walked, Theodore stopped beneath the oak tree at the edge of the garden. "I used to think legacy was made of concrete and glass," he said. "But I was wrong. It is made of people, those who choose to care when no one is watching." Clara smiled. "You finally sound like the man your wife believed you were." He chuckled, low and warm. "Maybe you helped remind me." They reached a small gazebo overlooking the lake. The same lawyer who had once drafted their marriage contract now stood there holding a velvet box. Theodore turned to Clara, his hand trembling slightly but his gaze steady. "Last time I asked you to marry me, it was a transaction," he said. "This time, it is a choice." Clara's breath caught as he opened the box. Inside was a simple gold band, the same one she had worn before, but this time, the inside was engraved with new words. "For love, not law." Tears filled her eyes as he continued. "I do not have forever, Clara, but I would like whatever time remains to be honest. No contracts, no terms, just us." She nodded, unable to speak, and slipped the ring onto her finger. The crowd of foundation staff and friends nearby broke into gentle applause. For a moment, the world felt still. The sunlight filtered through the trees, glinting off the lake's surface like scattered gold. Theodore took her hand, and together they faced the guests. Later, as the reception ended and the guests departed, Clara and Theodore sat by the water's edge. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, but all she could hear was the soft rustle of leaves and his steady breathing beside her. "You once told me," she said, that you feared being forgotten. He smiled faintly. And now, you will be remembered for more than your name, she said. You will be remembered for the kindness you chose. He looked out over the lake, the evening light reflecting in his eyes. Then I suppose we both found what we were looking for, he said quietly. Clara rested her head on his shoulder. The breeze carried the scent of spring, gentle and forgiving. For the first time, there were no lies, no signatures, no boundaries, only peace. And as the sun set over the Whitmore estate, the story that began as a contract ended as something far greater, a promise kept, and a love that finally became real.